Hello, back to Energy 101 with Sam Shelton, and today we're going to talk about ethanol as an energy source. We noted last time that it gets added to oil to make up the category called petroleum along with natural gas liquids. So let's look at ethanol as an energy source, to see where it comes from, what the impacts and where it's going, and what it all means. Number one, U.S. ethanol is essentially all produced from corn. Very isolated, very small examples of anything other than corn at this point. We'll talk about later about trying to get it from cellulose, but the sugars are locked up a lot tighter in the cellulose than it is in corn, so the corn is a lot easier to process and get the ethanol from. But today it's an astounding number to me that 40% of the corn grown in the U.S. goes to ethanol fuel. And of course that competes directly with food. Whether it's cattle feed, to feed cattle for our consumption, or whatever it is, the rest of the corn essentially all goes to some way in the food chain. So that of course drives up prices and has increased production, but the increased production you need to increase the price to make it viable. This shows the trend of our ethanol production from 1980 on, and notice that it started getting a big boost in the early 2000s and has grown rapidly up until about 2010, and notice it's flattened out in 2010 to approximately 1 million barrels per day. It's a little bit shy, about 9.9 million barrels a day. But why is it flattened out? Well, just briefly, it's because of the blending wall, what is called the blending wall. And why do we have the blending wall, and why would that limit the amount of ethanol that we need or can use? Well, it's because ethanol is blended with gasoline, and therefore if you add ethanol to the gasoline, then you use less gasoline when you burn a gallon of the ethanol combined with gasoline. And first we have the E10, and that's what most of the automobile gasoline that you buy has 10% ethanol in it. There's some very few exceptions to that, but there are some that some things need pure gasoline and not without any ethanol added. So it's 10% ethanol and 90% gasoline. All vehicles are approved for 10% ethanol and can run on that 10% ethanol with essentially no damage. Some people will argue that and debate it. If you go way back to the old carbureted cars, this can be a little bit more of a hassle and cause a few more problems back in the old cars. But and from 2000 on, newer cars are approved to burn up to 15% ethanol. That's been a little bit controversial, but they did that in order to try to get rid of the blending wall, as we call it. And what we mean here is that once you mix all the gasoline with 10% ethanol, then the only way to increase ethanol production is to increase gasoline fuel consumption, which we haven't done since about 2008. So due to the recession, our transportation fuel consumption has remained rather flat or gone down, and so you couldn't grow the amount of ethanol use because you could only mix it to 10%, and they were already doing that. And even though 15% is approved for 2,000 and newer cars, there's very few filling stations. In fact, I've never seen one that has it, because it's just one more pump with another choice that increases their expense and cost and capital costs to serve their public. There is E85, and that's for flex fuel vehicles, they call them. When it says flex fuel, it means it can burn up to 85% ethanol, and that of course means 15% gasoline. And there are about 10 million flex fuel vehicles on the road. And there's an incentive for that, but I won't even get into it now because you get a bump in fuel mileage that you're able to put on the window if it's a flex fuel vehicle. So right now, ethanol is a significant supplier to our transportation fuels, in that it supplies about 5% of our transportation fuel, which is significant. Obviously, much more than the propanes and biodiesel and compressed natural gas. CNG, by the way, I haven't mentioned that. CNG is compressed natural gas right there. But one warning is that a gallon of ethanol contains only about 2/3 as much energy when you burn it that you get out than gasoline. So you actually get a slightly lower fuel mileage when you burn 10% of E10 with 10% ethanol. In a 30 mile per gallon car, it would reduce the gas mileage to about 29. So it's about a 3% reduction in your gas mileage when you burn 10% ethanol. So it's a small one. You probably would never notice it. Your variability in driving is more than that. So here again, this is, I think we've seen this slide before, but this is the petroleum production, and we see now where the combined ethanol that we're talking about today, and here's the natural gas liquids, and here's the oil production. So that, since ethanol is lumped in with petroleum, we needed to talk about that. One point here is that there's a lot of debate about where the energy comes from with corn, and most studies show that it requires about 0.8 units of fossil fuel for every 1 unit of energy that you can get out of ethanol. And it's primarily natural gas and coal. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but just for a demonstrative purpose, corn ethanol, this is the amount of energy that has to be put in to produce the ethanol. And you can see the yellow is the amount of coal that it takes primarily in the electricity you uses. The red is the natural gas you use. Green is other, and the blue is petroleum for running the tractors and the trucks to take it to the granary and etc. Wood cellulose has the promise of being much better in that regard, in that it only requires maybe 10% of the amount of energy that you get out of it to put into it to grow the wood and to refine it into ethanol. Thank you.